Hello, I'm Haslinda Amin in Singapore. Anu Vizier is a good man to know in a crisis. His co-founder, chairman and CEO of International SOS, the world's leading risk services company. 11,000 employees and more than 10,000 corporate clients. Anu Vizier is today's high flyer. He's in the business of saving lives, but International SOS has grown into much more. Two friends who began an adventure 30 years ago have journeyed to the summit of the global industry they created. International SOS is present in more than 90 countries. For decades, it's been a lifeline for people caught up in some of the world's most dramatic events. The 2004 tsunami, the attack on the Taj in Mumbai. But it's also a daily lifeline for the hundreds of millions of people who travel the world every year. Anu Vizier, welcome to HighFlyers. Good to have you with us.
Nice to be with you.
The year is 1985. Two Frenchmen, both good friends, decided to set up a business here in the Lion City. What prompted that move?
Singapore was already very advanced. And so my friend, Dr. Ahem, who had just completed his military draft as a medical attaché at the French embassy, decided that he wanted to create a medical business in Southeast Asia. And of course, Singapore had to be the place to start it. Since we were and had been very close friends ever since from the age of 4, we decided to do it together. I moved from the US, where I was working as a banker in finance, and came to Singapore, which frankly I didn't know, much about.
The business is a business of saving lives, but it didn't start out that way. It was a different idea.
Well, part of it was to save lives. Part of it was to manage medical evacuations from Indonesia to Singapore, and then from the rest of Asia to either Singapore.
You had intended to make house calls initially.
But in addition, you're exactly right. We wanted to put together a house call system, which did exist in France, and which we put together in Jakarta. I think technically fantastic success. Business-wise, complete failure. Because in Indonesia and actually throughout Asia, when one is sick, one doesn't think of calling a doctor to your place. One goes to the emergency room. Whereas in France, you call a doctor to your place. So good concept, complete failure. So we had to change the model very quickly, and we established a clinic and an emergency room in Jakarta, and then things started rolling.
Initially, you had to convince companies, corporations that they needed your service. How difficult was that?
It was difficult because we changed the paradigm. Corporations had insurance plans in place, and the whole point for us was to convince corporations that the issue was not the financial protection that they needed for their employees. It was to have the services available on the ground, and that it was a human resource issue. A protection, prevention issue. And it took a bit of, people on the ground were instantly convinced. So local representatives of corporations wanted the service. The job was to convince headquarters back home in the US or in Europe that it was making sense to create a new program for their employees.
But once you convinced the likes of BP and Alstom, that was it.
That's exactly right. And once you have business leaders, the BP for the UK, Alstom for France, GE for the US, we were able to have the key customers and then demonstrating best practice, and step by step many others joined.
It was your first venture. I mean, as an entrepreneur, a startup, what was the key takeaway? If you could do things differently, now looking back, more than 30 years, what would you have done?
Well, the first thing is that when you come from a large business, and I was managing the US subsidiary of my group, you have many people that you work with, and suddenly with a startup, you push a button, nothing happens. And this is
you have to move it yourself.
This is very, very perturbing. But what would I do differently? I think I might do it with more capital, because we really started small.
You started with $100,000.
We started with $100,000 with a team of around 20 people. And so it took a while the concept really was the right one. But of course, we didn't have the resources to sell as much as we should or could. So if I had to do it together all over again, I would start with more resources. And if it had to be today, I would start with far many more resources. So today, companies need to be first to market. So you need to be able to jump in with a great deal of firepower.
In the earlier days, was retaining talent a problem?
No, quite the opposite, actually. The early days of our startup, at least what we did, we attracted extraordinary talent who are still with the company to this day, and who joined us even though the company was very, very small compared to their skill set. For example, we had a neurosurgeon from Australia. We had because they love the adventure, what it was representing. And being part of a small team, building up a completely new industry, attracted very, very high talent.
I'm curious, is it a risky business? Is it bulletproof? I mean, can it ride the recession, the business that you're in?
No business in today's world is bulletproof, including ours. And we have gone through a complex cycle because a large pocket of our clients is made of the oil, gas, mining, energy companies, which have gone through a tremendous crisis over the past 4 or 5 years and have clearly reduced their employee ranks. So we are not bulletproof. However, I think we've been able to continuously adapt and innovate. And innovation is really our DNA. We continuously innovate. For example, when you had the SARS issue, and suddenly nobody could be transported anywhere. So if you were a SARS patient somewhere, you were stuck. After a while, after it took us 8 weeks, within 8 weeks, we created the first unit in order to be able to transport a patient from one point to the other. And we did transport patients from Thailand to Hong Kong at the time safely. So an entire creation from our doctors and engineers in Australia in that particular case. So innovation is really what we do, and this is what our clients are expecting because it is a new industry. But now it's become an established industry.
Having been an entrepreneur this long, what's been the lowest point of your career? The most trying?
It is an interesting question. We started in '85, and then from '85 to '98, we were in Asia. And Asia was booming. From 1985 to 1998, complete boom. And as you very well remember, in 1998, the Asian crisis hit. And the crisis was massive. And overnight. I mean, overnight the financial markets were closed, financing was not available anymore. And we were suddenly very, very constrained in Asia. The chance we had was that we bought a competitor of ours the same year in the US, and the US market was doing very, very well. And so we became global at the time when Asia started to go into recession. The most complicated and trying case we've ever been involved in has been the tsunami in 2004. It was unprecedented, it was massive.
started with 2 offices in Singapore and Jakarta. Now you're over 90 countries, 11,000 strong. What's been the most challenging part about growing the business? Was it recruiting talent, for instance?
Yeah, this is a very good point. Because we created a new industry, a new way of providing healthcare. Clearly, nobody had any kind of experience in it. And we had to convince the right people. But the beauty of a startup is that you can find exceptional people who are prepared to share and live an adventure. And really, a new business is an adventure.
But I'm curious, what's the recruitment process like? I mean, these people have to deal with crisis, stress, intense situations. What do you look for before recruiting? I mean, a doctor is a doctor, but you need more than that.
Well, we need, of course, doctors who are very good doctors. But on top of it, we need doctors who are interested in living outside the usual setting of a doctor, which is either a private practice or the hospital. So doctors want to travel, doctors who want to experience the world, who want to change their lives. And the chance that we have today is that most doctors who really want an international job, they are going to come and call on us.
So you've been in this business for more than 30 years. You receive about 4 million calls a year. What's been the most complicated case you've had to deal with?
To this day, the most complicated and trying case we've ever been involved in has been the tsunami in 2004. The reason was that it was unprecedented, it was massive, it was on a multi-country basis. I mean, Thailand, Sri Lanka, Indonesia were involved. We had to deal with a multitude of people to take care of at the time of the tsunami, and then many people were missing, and so for more than 12 months we were working trying to identify and finding the missing individuals. So it was technically complicated, resource-wise we are very stretched, and emotionally draining.
And you were also involved in the terrorist attack in Mumbai. Tell us what happened and what your involvement entails.
So in Mumbai, actually, we were called during the terrorist attack. And so we were our security personnel in several of our assistance centers were on the phone with our members during the terrorist attack, telling them what to do, how to take the best care of themselves in an extraordinarily dangerous situation, and handling the situation from the beginning to the end, liaising with the security forces to let them know that we had members of ours involved in this attack.
You received 3,000 calls for that incident itself.
Yes, but not, of course, 3,000 from the people involved. But we were literally, we had hour-long conversations with the members involved in the hostage taking.
Have you had a failed mission before? And I'll be surprised if you say no.
Well, we had missions which didn't go as well as they should, but altogether, I think that we have enough redundancies built in so that missions go as they should.
Why do you think we're seeing more and more cases of crisis? Is it because more and more people are traveling? Is it due to mobility? What's your own observation?
Well, the obvious answer is the global village. Everybody is going everywhere. You have more people on the planet, and corporations are now, governments, employers of any kind are sending people everywhere. I'll give you one example, which is the education world. Universities are now the institutions with the largest number of mobile people. At any one time, a large university is going to have thousands of foreign students inside its compound, as well as sending overseas hundreds or thousands of students. So, strangely enough, actually, large universities have more people traveling and being out of their country of origin than, for example, most businesses.
You're in the business of saving lives, but technology plays a huge role in it. And we know that you invest 6% of your budget into technology. That's a substantial amount. How has technology changed the way you operate, and how do you expect it to change 10, 15, 20 years down the road?
I mean, for us, technology has been extraordinary because the key link for us has been the telephone. Since we started with assistance centers, so those are centers which function 24/7 with doctors, security people, all kinds of experts, and access to our network of providers around the world.
But what can you do today due to technology that you couldn't do 10 years ago?
Well, the first thing, when we started, we were using beepers, and then these huge mobile phones where you had to carry a suitcase to make a phone call. What is extraordinary today with new technology is that through digitalization and telehealth, we can do things that we couldn't do before. Today, when we have to deal with a crew member of an airline in New York who is falling sick just before boarding a plane, through a telehealth consultation, we can, in 40 minutes, assess the crew and see whether this crew member can or cannot board the plane, and at a very low cost. Just a year ago, it was a 4.5-hour work to get a doctor going to the hotel, visiting the crew member, and it was costing $850 US. So you see the kind of change that it brings. We can now communicate and treat our members around the world through telehealth. They can chat with us. We can exchange SMSs. We can send emergency mass notification. And actually, we've become a media because we send 24/7 medical and security information to our members.
How do you view risk in your own personal life?
To sleep well.
Do you sleep well?
I do sleep well.
I know the business is based on membership. They pay an annual fee. And it does seem like expectations from the company have expanded. What do these corporations want from International SOS?
As Linda, what those corporations wanted in the first place was us saving and protecting the lives of their employees. Today, it goes far beyond that. They really want to show that their duty of care is going to be fulfilled, that their employees are going to feel comfortable and safe while traveling or being international signees. Realize that now 1 in 8 employees of any corporation is traveling internationally. So it has become 1/12 of a workforce is an international traveler.
Truth be told, though, it was not something you wanted to do as a young boy. You wanted to be exactly what your father was. What happened along the way?
He was a surgeon, and well, I went into medical school and I didn't like it. So
why not?
I realized that the hospital environment and the subject matter was not really what I wanted to do, and what I was really interested in was politics and business, and so I went into the political studies and business school.
And talking about politics, you're passionate about it. How is that translating to in real life?
Well, I've not gone into politics. I've gone into
Any
business.
intentions to?
Well, I've spent a lot of time over the past 18 months. I was in charge of the economic platform of the conservative candidate in France at the presidential election. So I spent a lot of time with politicians over the past 18 months. And I'm still involved in a number of issues with, for example, the Paris region, dealing with a lot of developments that we are trying to manage, in particular in relation to Brexit. London is Brexiting, Paris is trying to attract a lot of interest.
And speaking of managing, how are you managing the different responsibilities? You're running an 11,000 strong company, you're commuting to the different countries that you operate in, and you're involved in politics. How do you manage that?
I think it's a question of organization. But the thing is that the larger a corporation is, the more resources you have. Now I'm working with many colleagues who can operate without me, who are actually far better than I am, so they tell me. And and I think that the business is actually benefiting from the other activities. I've always felt in life that one needs to change one's circle, because if you only deal with the people you meet within your business environment, it is very restrictive.
I know, I'm curious, on a personal level, because of what you do, your stress threshold must be really, really high. What would it take to rattle you? Does you stress out in any way? How do you view risk in your own personal life?
To sleep well.
Do you sleep well?
I do sleep well, and I think it is fundamental. To succeed in business, I think as an entrepreneur, it is an advantage to have a strong resistance to stress. Because in business you have far many more bad news and good news. And usually the bad news fly very quickly, the good news not as quickly. So I tend to be fairly even from a mood standpoint.
But when was the last time you were stressed out?
When we had a cybersecurity attack. This was 3 years ago. It was very serious. I think we did cope with it extremely well. But it was of very high concern, and talking to some key stakeholders about it was not an easy thing. And then building up the systems and the capabilities so that the chance of repeating it is lowered was quite an undertaking. So this one was very stressful, and I think that cybersecurity will be stressful going forward.
If you could look into the crystal ball, what do you think will be the biggest risks for the world? I
think cybersecurity is one, and the general political situation, which is becoming far more chaotic right now, is another one. Because we don't know, I mean, we see every day new incidents taking place among nations, and it's quite critical that people go back to a system where one doesn't say openly what one thinks, and keep some reserve so as to leave some understanding for the others. So I think the world is more dangerous today, of course, more terrorism, and within a community which is far more intertwined than we used to, because we are completely interdependent. Europe is interdependent now with Asia, of course, and it's going to be even more so going forward.
You've succeeded in building a company from a $500,000 company to in excess of $1.5 billion, from 2 to 11,000. What would you like to leave behind? What's the legacy you'd like to leave behind?
Well, legacy is a big word, but what I really want to leave behind, or actually want to develop, is the fact that we have created this industry around taking care of employees' lives around the world, convincing corporations that it's good for them, good for their bottom line, and good for their goodwill, that spending money on their employees from a prevention standpoint to a reactive standpoint when crisis happens is good for everyone. And I think this industry is really now starting to be recognized, and I want this industry to grow and being developed as one clear market segment.
Arnaud Vissier, thank you so much for being on HighFlyers. It's been a pleasure.
Linda, thank you.